What comes to mind when you see these images? Are these idols from the ancient world brought forward to our time? What are the idols that we need to avoid today? We're going to cover this in two parts. There's a lot to get into here. If you haven't already done so, please remember to join this channel, Talmidei Yehoah. Remember to hit like and subscribe. So let's get into it. Let's start off with this photograph I took back in 1997, the first time I visited Israel. I went to Bethlehem, in Hebrew we say Beth Lechem, and I visited the spot where they say Jesus was born. Now, that spot today is found inside of a church, a basilica, that was originally built in 326, refurbished by the Crusaders in the 12th century. It's got a marble floor over it right now. But as you're lining up to enter in to the spot where they say Jesus was born, you go underneath this painting of Mary and Jesus. Now, besides the fact that you could see in this painting, clearly the Crusaders thought and understood that the ancient Israelites were black because they pictured Mary, who would have been an Israelite, and her son as black. Clearly, though, you could see around the heads of both Mary and Jesus images that represent the Son. We're going to talk more about that as we continue. Notice as you get into now the very spot where Jesus was born, we see here a sun symbol on the marble floor. And they say that to touch the actual spot where Jesus was born, you need to put your hand, bow down, put your hand through that hole. And the cave floor, the original cave floor, is through the hole. And so every day, hundreds of people line up and they put their hand through the hole as they say a prayer. But do you realize that what is actually taking place is that every day, hundreds of people, many without consciously reflecting on what they're actually doing, are bowing down to the image of the S-U-N. Not the S-O-N, right? Not the sun, but the sun. That's what this silver image is. And what most people don't even realize is that there's a reason why the Crusaders gave that sun symbol 14 rays extending out from it. Those 14 rays represent the 14 parts of Nimrod's body, as legend has it. And you could check the legend yourself. I'll flash it up here for a moment for you. But there are legends around the death of Osiris, the sun deity that was worshipped in ancient Egypt, whose body was cut into 14 pieces by Seth, his brother, and his wife Isis collected the parts, found 13, hence making 13 a very significant number for those who follow these legends. The missing piece was the phallus, the reproductive organ. And so she took and made a symbol of that phallus, the missing piece, in the form of an obelisk. It was said to have been made of gold. And having put his body back together, she had intercourse and gave birth to a son named Horus. And so, according to the legend that is followed by many in the world, not only anciently, but even in our world today, her child Horus was the rebirth of Osiris. And hence, the idea of mother and child originally, long before the idea of Mary and Jesus, was that the mother and child represented Isis and Horus, the original mother-child story. Now, we don't have to get into the details of where all this came from. Let's just notice that the Torah is very explicit that we shouldn't use any of these symbols. We shouldn't bow down to them. The use of these symbols is idolatrous for those who are trying to return to Yehovah. Then Elohim spoke all these words, saying, I am Yehovah, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of the house of bondage, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other Elohim before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, or any likeness of what is in the heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them. And the Hebrew word translated here as worship is literally a word that means bow. It's tishtachaweh. Don't bow down to them or serve them. For I, Yehovah, your Elohim, am a jealous Elohim. And the Hebrew word translated here is the term kana. Yehovah says he is El Kana. He is a jealous Elohim, inflicting the punishment of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing favor to the thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. Clearly, if we're trying to return to Yehovah, we have to put away any images, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, earth beneath, the water under the earth, and we should not bow down to any such images, whether it's Mary and Jesus, Isis and Horus, regardless of what you think the image is. There's no excuse for us today to bow down to such images because according to what's written on the 2 tables of stone, bowing down to such images is strictly forbidden. This is idolatry. Furthermore, Moshe warned, he said, so be very careful yourselves, since you did not see any form on the day Yehovah spoke to you at Horeb from the midst of the fire, so that you do not act corruptly and make a carved image for yourselves in the form of any figure, a representation of male or female. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later, because what you'll find is that in the ancient world, often idolatry was presented not in just a male, but the idols were male and female, often brought together in unison and worshiped as one. And we'll talk more about that idea as we continue looking at the idols that were brought forward from the ancient world that we need to avoid in our world today. So it says here, don't make for yourselves a carved image, a representation of male or female, a representation of any animal that is on the earth, a representation of any winged bird that flies in the sky, a representation of anything that crawls on the ground, or a representation of any fish that is in the water below. And be careful not to raise your eyes to heaven to look at the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the heavenly lights, and allow yourself to be drawn away and worship them and serve them, things which Yehovah, your Elohim, has allotted to the peoples under the whole heaven. And I should point out that when Yehovah spoke these words or gave Moshe these instructions, he was speaking to Israel, encouraging Israel to worship Yehovah and Yehovah alone, because Yehovah was in a covenant relationship with the nation of Israel, a relationship that no other nation had. Instead, the other nations were left to themselves, and they developed their own idols that they worshiped. Now, some may say, well, were they actually worshiping the sun, or was the sun simply an image of enlightenment? My point to you is, it doesn't matter one bit of difference for us. Whether you worship the image of the sun or you worship enlightenment, it's all idolatry to us if it's not the worship of Yehovah and Yehovah alone. And so these are idols brought forward into our world today from the ancient world that we need to avoid. As I already showed you, there's that sun image. That sun image represented Nimrod. Some people say Nimrod. Some people say Osiris and her son Horus. Whatever. It's an idol that we need to avoid. As we just saw, also there was talk about avoiding the worship of any type of Elohim, whether it be male or female, or male and female brought together as one. Notice that the prophet Eliyahu, who was sent to the children of Israel to turn them away from idolatry, to turn them back to the pure worship of Yahweh, he confronted the king of Israel, Ahav, and said to him, we read this in the first book of Melachim, chapter 18. He said, now then, send orders and gather to me all Yisrael at Mount Carmel with 450 prophets of Baal. Now, Baal was the male deity, the male Elohim. And as we saw in the video that I prepared on who or what is God, we know that one name for the Baal that they worship was literally God. God is an idol. And if you don't understand that, please watch the video on who or what is God to get a clear understanding of why God, which represents fortune, is an idol that we shouldn't worship. We should worship Yahweh and Yahweh alone. Also, it says here, and the 400 prophets of the Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. Asherah was the female counterpart of Baal. If you're using a tool, let's say Blue Letter Bible, you can open it up. You can see the interlinear translation. You can see the word Asherah. Notice that it represents the Babylonian Astarte, Canaanite goddess of fortune and happiness, the supposed consort of Baal. Her images are, and it goes on to describe the images. The point here is that this female consort is sort of the female counterpart of the male god. So you've got Baal God on the one hand, god of fortune. You've got Astarte, Asherah on the other hand, this female deity, male and female, being worshipped together as one. This is idolatry. And this idolatry didn't exist only in the ancient world. Just like many people, when they pray to God, which is an idol. They're praying to, even bowing down to, images of male and female deity united together. Many people doing it without even realizing what the images that they kneel down in front of actually represent. In the Encyclopedia Britannica, it says Astarte, also spelled Ashtart or Ashtart, a great goddess of the ancient Middle East and chief deity of Tyre, Sidon, and Elat, important Mediterranean seaports. Hebrew scholars now feel that the goddess Ashtaroth, mentioned so often in the Bible, is a deliberate conflation of the Greek name Astarte and the Hebrew word Boshet, which means shame. In other words, just to not even say the name of this idol in a way that gives this idol any credit, it's understood that when in the first book of Melachim, and you can see here in this same article, it says King Shlomo married 2 foreign wives, followed Astarte, the goddess of the Sidonians. For Shlomo became a follower of Ashtaroth. So here we see that the Hebrew word Ashtoreth is used, but according to many scholars, the word Ashtoreth actually means Astarte, but mixed with Astarte is sort of a Hellenization of the word, but the writers of the Hebrew text took the word Astarte and conflated it with the word Boshet, which means shame, and came up with this term Ashtaroth just to add shame. Like, if you're following this, that's shameful. This female deity, along with Baal, the male counterpart, worship of these 2 deities is shameful. And it's one of the reasons why the children of Israel were carried into captivity. It's noted also that Astarte, in terms of her iconography, she was often depicted naked in presence of lions, identified respectively with symbols of sexuality and war. She's also depicted as winged, carrying the solar disk and the crescent moon as a headdress. Her equivalents in other languages, in Greek, she was equated with Aphrodite. In Roman culture, she was equated with Venus. In Mesopotamia, in particular Persia, it was Ishtar, which carries over to us today. The word Ishtar is the Persian way of saying what we say today in English as Easter. So when people are celebrating Easter, they're actually celebrating a festival to this same female deity, fertility deity, Ishtar. That's why when people celebrate Easter and people are confused as to what does Easter have to do with rabbits? Well, if you're thinking of it as just representing somehow the resurrection, nothing, right? Rabbits, but if you think about it in terms of fertility deity and the ancient Persian custom of worshiping a fertility deity, rabbits reproduce rapidly. And so therefore it makes total sense why rabbits are associated with Easter. Same thing with eggs. Eggs have nothing to do with the New Testament teachings around Jesus, his crucifixion or resurrection. If you don't yet understand the problems with the Greek text, I encourage you to watch the series on the difference between the Hebrew Mashiach and the Christian Messiah. Please watch that series. That'll give you a clear understanding of why we don't follow the Greek text. We're following and we're trying to return to the words that are Al Pi Yehovah B'Yad Moshe. This idea of Ishtar with eggs are fertility symbols. And so it follows that Ishtar, the celebration of Ishtar in today's world as Easter, is simply a mispronunciation of the term Ishtar. Most people have no idea why they're coloring eggs and why they're celebrating these festivals, but they are just worshiping the same false Elohim. I already gave a video on don't celebrate any festival until you watch this. I talked about in that video how Purim is the worship of false Elohim. And you can read the article that I referenced there. There will be a link in the comments below. You can read an article where you can see that the book of Esther is just another corruption of the same Persian name, Ishtar. So Esther and Mordecai is just Ishtar and Marduk, false Elohim. We should not have anything to do with the worship of Ishtar, the celebration of Purim, the celebration of Easter, all of these festivals. These are not found in the Torah. They're not found in the book of Vayikra, chapter 23, which lists all the festivals we should observe. And so if you're observing any of these other festivals, is it possible then that you are actually taking part in the very idolatry that caused Yisrael to be banished from the land, to be put into exile, and the temple to be destroyed? This is what Eliyahu told Yisrael to turn away from. We can't hop between two opinions. Like the prophet Eliyahu said, if Yahweh is Elohim, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him. We need to make a choice, and we need to put idols away from us and turn back to the worship of Yahweh and Yahweh alone. Going a little bit further into the worship of the sun and the moon. When we think about the sun and the moon, we already talked about obelisks. Here are pictures of ancient obelisks in Egypt. Here are pictures I took when I visited Ethiopia of obelisks in Ethiopia. In fact, it's interesting to note how in Ethiopia, because a large number of the children of Israel had fled Israel during a time of great idolatry, migrated down the Nile River, and moved into Ethiopia carrying with them the Ark of the Covenant. But they turned to idolatry also, and they built obelisks. Interestingly enough, though, they circumcised the top of their obelisks. But they're still obelisks, still representations of the sun deity, still idols, things that we should not have anything to do with. But how are those brought forward into the modern world? Well, have you ever considered the Washington Monument? Which, by the way, is not a true obelisk because it's not a monolith. It's made up of multiple stones. But it is in the shape and form of an obelisk. And that particular Washington Monument obelisk is accompanied with a reflecting pool. And the pool that's under it, therefore, gives us the reverse, or let's say upside down image of the obelisk. Hence representing not just the male Baal, but also the female counterpart as well, because when you see the male, you see in the reflecting pool the female part that reflects perfectly the light from the male. Just like the moon doesn't generate light of its own, the moon reflects the light of the sun. And so with the Washington Monument, we end up with the male and female deity. We end up with both the male and the female being worshipped together as one. And this, my friends, is idolatry. We're going to end right here, and we'll pick up this topic in our next video. Please remember, share this video with your friends. Remember to hit like and subscribe. And join us next time. We're going to continue to show you where the ancient idols are brought forward into our world today. These are the idols we need to avoid. Shalom, shalom.